Lenny Wilkens, who died at 88. The final footage. It was a quiet morning when the news began to spread, first as a whisper among former players' group chats, then as headlines across the sports world. Lenny Wilkens, the man who taught basketball how to breathe with grace and integrity, was gone. In an era where the game has become faster, louder, and more commercialized, Lenny was the embodiment of something purer, a bridge between the golden age of basketball and the modern world it birthed. He wasn't just a coach or a player. He was a philosopher in sneakers, a quiet storm who believed that greatness wasn't measured in trophies or stats, but in character. As the NBA community began to mourn, tributes poured in from legends, teammates, and rivals alike. Some called him coach, others called him mentor, but to all, he was the same, the man who changed the game without ever needing to raise his voice. For decades, Lenny Wilkens' story unfolded like a cinematic journey through American history. From the segregated streets of Brooklyn to the bright lights of the NBA, from a soft-spoken point guard to one of the most respected coaches of all time, his life was not only about basketball, but about leadership, empathy, and the long shadow a good man leaves behind. Tonight, on the final footage, we look back at the life, legacy, and lasting lessons of a man who defined what it truly means to lead both on and off the court. Before the bright lights and roaring crowds, before the championships and Hall of Fame inductions, there was simply Lenny, a boy from Brooklyn who dribbled through cracked sidewalks and dreamt of something more. Born in 1937 to a working-class family, Lenny Wilkens grew up in a world that often seemed stacked against him. His mother, a strong and steady woman, worked tirelessly to provide for her children. His father, absent for most of his youth, left behind a void that young Lenny would learn to fill with discipline, humility, and grace. Brooklyn, in those years, wasn't glamorous. It was gritty, unforgiving, and divided by lines of race and class that shaped every opportunity. Yet, in that struggle, Lenny found purpose. He fell in love with basketball not because it promised fame, but because it offered freedom. On the asphalt courts near his neighborhood, the ball became his escape, a rhythm he could control when so much of life was uncertain. His early coaches saw something in him, something rare, a quiet intelligence, a poise beyond his years. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. As he rose through the ranks at Boys High School and later at Providence College, Lenny became known for his calm, deliberate style of play. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the kind of player who sought the spotlight. Instead, he orchestrated games like a conductor, steady hands, sharp eyes, and a mind that seemed to see 2 plays ahead. His teammates would later say he made the game feel slower, easier, as if time itself bent to his rhythm. In the 1,950 seconds and early 1,960 seconds, the NBA was still finding its identity. And so was Lenny. As one of the few black players to enter the league during that time, he faced barriers both visible and invisible. There were cities that wouldn't welcome him, hotels that wouldn't house him, and words whispered under breaths that cut deeper than any foul. But Lenny never fought back with anger, he fought back with excellence. He believed that dignity was its own form of resistance. When he was drafted by the St. Louis Hawks in 1960, Lenny began what would become one of the most enduring careers in basketball history. He wasn't just a player. He was a student of the game, always analyzing, always learning. He played the way he lived methodically, thoughtfully, with an unwavering belief in doing things the right way. Those early years in the NBA were different. There were no chartered flights, no 7-figure salaries, no endorsement deals. The players taped their own ankles, carried their own bags, and shared meals in modest diners along the road. But for Lenny, it wasn't about glamour. It was about the game. He was known for his incredible basketball IQ, but also for his compassion. Teammates often said that he cared more about helping others improve than chasing personal glory. He believed that the best teams were families, built on trust and accountability. That philosophy would one day define his legacy as a coach, as a player. Lenny racked up achievements quietly. 9 all-star appearances, a reputation as one of the most cerebral point guards of his generation, and an uncanny ability to lead, even without speaking much. He wasn't the loudest man on the floor, but he was always the one everyone turned to when the clock was running out. Off the court, he was just as grounded. He married his wife, Marilyn, and together they built a life that reflected everything Lenny valued: love, faith, and community. He was never one to bask in fame. Instead, he used his platform to mentor young players, to show them that success was never just about what you did on the court, but how you carried yourself beyond it. By the time he transitioned into coaching in the late 1960 seconds, Lenny's reputation had already preceded him. He was known not just as a player who could read defenses, but as a leader who could read people. He understood that players needed more than strategy. They needed belief. He once said, "Coaching isn't about shouting orders. It's about showing someone they can be better than they think they are." That belief system would go on to shape generations of players and coaches alike. But before all the wins and records, there was simply a man. One who grew up in a world that told him he wasn't supposed to succeed, and who responded not with anger or defiance, but with excellence and empathy. By the late 1980 seconds and 1990 seconds, as the NBA began to evolve into a global spectacle, Wilkens became something of a moral compass within the sport, a symbol of the old world's integrity surviving within the new. He coached stars like Dominique Wilkins, Gary Payton, and Shawn Kemp. Yet even amid fame, he never forgot the lessons of Brooklyn's cracked courts or the hands of his mother, rough from work, but soft with love. To know Lenny Wilkens was to understand that greatness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks softly, speaks slowly, and leaves behind echoes that never fade. The world knew him as a Hall of Famer. Those who played for him knew him as something far more rare, a good man. It was early morning when the news broke, the kind of quiet, gray dawn where the world feels still before it shifts forever. Phones began to buzz across locker rooms, sports networks, and former players' text threads. At first, it didn't seem real. Lenny Wilkens? Gone? For decades, he had seemed timeless. Even at 88, Wilkens carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had defined his career. He had been one of those rare figures in sports who seemed immune to time, the kind of man whose wisdom, whose presence, transcended the years. But now, as the truth sank in, the basketball world stood still. News anchors on sports channels struggled to contain their emotion. Social media flooded with photos of Wilkens, some of him as a young guard for the street, Louis Hawks, his gaze sharp and determined. Others as the composed, distinguished coach, with a clipboard in one hand and belief in his eyes. For many, the loss felt like the closing of an era. Former players began to call one another, their voices trembling. Vince Carter, Doug Christie, and countless others who had been molded by him spoke not just of the coach they'd known, but the man who had changed them. He was calm, always calm, one said. He didn't yell unless he needed to. He'd pull you aside, talk to you like a father would. He'd say, "This is how we'll handle it." The stories poured out like a collective elegy of the lessons he'd given freely, the jokes he'd told in the locker room, the way he'd insist that being a good teammate mattered more than any stat line. But as tributes spread, one could feel the deeper current beneath the grief. The realization that they hadn't just lost a coach, they'd lost one of the pillars of the game itself. In Toronto, where Wilkens had once coached the Raptors to their first ever playoff victory, the team released a simple message that echoed what so many felt. "Thank you, Coach, for showing us what leadership looks like." For those who had been close to him, the memories came rushing back: the long practices, the quiet talks after games, the sense of calm that always seemed to follow him wherever he went. Doug Christie, one of his former players, recalled how Wilkens taught through action, not words. He used to tell us, "We didn't have trainers back then. We taped our own ankles and went to work." It wasn't a complaint. It was a philosophy, a reminder that you didn't wait for things to be easy. You found strength in the doing. Even in his final years, long after his last coaching job, Wilkens remained a mentor to the game. He'd attend community events, support charities, and offer advice to young coaches navigating the pressures of modern basketball. Though his health had begun to fade, his spirit never did. Friends would say he still talked about the game with the same spark in his eyes, that endless curiosity that had made him a teacher of not just basketball, but life. The day he passed, those closest to him said it was peaceful, surrounded by family, by love, by the life he had built brick by brick through kindness, discipline, and faith. In one poignant image that spread online, a single basketball sat at center court in an empty gym, a black ribbon tied around it. The caption read, "For Coach, the game is quieter without you." For all the outpouring of grief, there was a shared undercurrent of celebration too, an acknowledgement that few lives had been lived with such purpose, such clarity, such humility. The discovery of his passing was painful, yes, but it also reminded everyone what it meant to live a meaningful life, one rooted not in glory, but in goodness. And so, as the world began to mourn, it also began to remember the lessons, the laughter, the light that Lenny Wilkens had brought into so many lives. His death wasn't an ending. It was an echo, a reminder that true greatness never really leaves us. It lingers in the people we become because of those who believed in us first. When a public figure passes, there's often an investigation, not in the criminal sense, but in the human one. People search for answers, for stories that explain how this person became who they were. With Lenny Wilkens, that search began almost immediately. Reporters, historians, and fellow players began piecing together the mosaic of his 88 years, a man whose life intersected with some of the most transformative decades in American and basketball history. To understand the impact of his passing, they needed to retrace the journey of how Lenny became a legend. The media coverage wasn't sensational or invasive. It was reverent. Journalists revisited his childhood in Brooklyn, the quiet, determined boy raised by a single mother in the 1940 seconds, when opportunity was a luxury few could afford. He grew up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood, where concrete courts became sanctuaries, and dreams were measured in jump shots. His friends remembered him as the polite one, a kid who never raised his voice, but somehow always commanded respect. The deeper they dug, the clearer a picture began to emerge. Lenny Wilkens' greatness wasn't just talent, it was temperament. He learned early that control wasn't about power, it was about patience. That mindset would come to define his entire career, both as a player and coach. Archival footage resurfaced grainy black and white interviews from the 1960 seconds, showing a young Lenny wearing his Street Louis Hawks uniform, speaking softly but with conviction. "Basketball's about trust," he said in one clip. "You can't win if you don't trust the man next to you." That single quote seemed to echo through the decades, repeated in nearly every tribute following his death. For many, that was the essence of who he was. A man who understood that leadership meant trust, not dominance. Former players began doing their own kind of reflection, a collective investigation into the lessons he'd left behind. Reporters from The Athletic and Sports Illustrated began calling old teammates and assistant coaches, asking them to share stories that revealed the man behind the calm. The answers were intimate and consistent. Wilkens never led with ego. He led with empathy. One assistant coach, who worked with him during his time with the Cleveland Cavaliers, recalled a night when a rookie missed a crucial free throw that cost the team the game. As reporters crowded the locker room, ready to pounce, Wilkens stepped in front of the cameras. "We win as a team, we lose as a team," he said quietly, shielding his young player from blame. Afterward, he told the rookie privately, "Mistakes don't define you, how you respond to them does." Moments like that, invisible to the cameras, but unforgettable to those who witnessed them, were what made the investigation into Wilkens' legacy so revealing. This wasn't a man driven by accolades. This was a man driven by the desire to make people better. In the days following his passing, sports networks began airing special segments about his career. One of the most striking came from NBA TV, a half-hour tribute titled Lenny Wilkens, The Quiet Revolution. It wasn't about statistics or game footage. It was about the human philosophy that guided him. Players described how he'd sit quietly before every game, eyes closed, visualizing not just plays, but possibilities, how to reach his team on a deeper level. The investigation into his life also revealed how much he'd overcome. As one of the first black coaches in NBA history, Wilkens carried a kind of pressure few could comprehend. He faced scrutiny, subtle discrimination, and unspoken expectations that others didn't. But he never met anger with anger. He met it with dignity. Steve Kerr, reflecting in an interview, said it best. Lenny made it possible for so many of us, not just coaches of color, but anyone who wanted to lead differently. He proved you didn't have to shout to be heard. Through interviews, documentaries, and archived footage, the story of Wilkens' life began to take shape like a puzzle finally being completed. Every piece, every team, every lesson, every triumph and setback fit perfectly into a larger picture of a man who led through integrity. Investigators of legacy, like historians and journalists, often talk about impact per minute, how much a single life influences others over time. When they applied that measure to Lenny Wilkens, the results were staggering. Over his 45-year career in professional basketball, he directly influenced more than 500 players and assistant coaches, many of whom went on to lead teams, mentor youth, or build programs inspired by his teachings. Even beyond the hardwood, Wilkens' fingerprints were everywhere. His foundation had donated millions to children's hospitals and education initiatives. In Seattle, the Lenny Wilkens Foundation for Children continued to thrive, funding scholarships and community programs that kept his spirit alive long before and after his passing. Investigators found that even after retirement, he'd continued attending community events, showing up unannounced at youth tournaments or local fundraisers. He didn't crave recognition, in fact. He often asked that his name be left out of press releases. "It's about the kids," he'd say. "It's always about the kids." As this deeper investigation unfolded, one truth became undeniable. Lenny Wilkens' story wasn't just about basketball. It was about the power of quiet leadership in a noisy world. It was about the steady hand, the gentle voice, the belief that greatness can exist without arrogance. Reporters who initially set out to write obituaries found themselves writing love letters to a man whose life was proof that kindness and excellence are not opposites, but allies. And so, while there was no mystery in the literal sense, there was discovery in the emotional one. The investigation revealed what many already suspected, that Lenny Wilkens had left behind something far greater than trophies. He'd left behind a philosophy, a way of being, a standard for how to live. If this story resonates, we invite you to reflect on the lessons within it. Think about the mentors who have shaped your own life, the leaders who have quietly guided you, and the values you wish to pass on. Engage with the community here at The Final Footage, where we explore these narratives not for sensationalism, but for understanding, connection, and empathy. By subscribing, sharing, and participating, you become part of a movement that honors human stories in their complexity and beauty. Lenny Wilkens' life demonstrates that a person's true impact cannot always be measured by tangible accolades alone. It is felt in the quiet moments, the lasting influence, and the unseen ways they touch others' lives. His story is a reminder that greatness is accessible to anyone who chooses to live with integrity, compassion, and courage. By revisiting his life, we pay tribute to the shoulders upon which today's leaders stand and ensure that his lessons continue to inspire generations to come. In closing, let us hold on to the essence of Lenny Wilkens, a man who balanced the intensity of competition with the softness of understanding, who achieved record-breaking success while remaining grounded in humility, and who left a legacy far larger than any statistic could capture. His life teaches us that while victories on the scoreboard fade, the victories of the heart, the victories of character, and the victories of humanity endure forever. For more stories of profound lives, chilling mysteries, and real human experiences, subscribe to The Final Footage. Walk with us through the shadows and the spotlights. Explore the moments that define us and discover the people who, like Lenny Wilkens, leave indelible marks on the world.